Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Serial entrepreneur Chris Jones, founder and president of CANNABIS XPRESS, a leading chain of cannabis retail stores started in Ontario, is back on the podcast to tell us his adventure expanding his successful store concept to small town New Brunswick, one of the most innovative markets in Canada. Let's listen in now. Chris, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, or should I say welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. It's a lot's changed since we did the first interview, so I'm excited to be back and, just tell everyone what we've been up to.
Yeah, fantastic. I ran into you, where was it? We were at the dinner for the Retail Excellence, RCC Retail Excellence, and we were chatting. I'm like, I got to get you back on the mic, and took a bit of time during the summer. I was so interested in what's going on in your world. Let's get into, first of all, for anybody who may have missed our first conversation, who doesn't know who you are, not enough, who are you, and what's your background, and a little bit about your story, and what do you do for a living?
That's a great start. My name is Chris Jones. I am the founder CEO of CANNABIS XPRESS. We are a chain of 17 cannabis retail stores in Canada. I have 14 stores in Ontario and 3 stores in New Brunswick. Prior to this business, I actually had another cannabis retail business where I had 4 cannabis retail stores. I opened them up pretty early on in Ontario, picking small towns where, licensing was, it was actually during COVID. So I picked cities where it was more open, where people could actually still go into the store. And then I pivoted from that to sell the business and start CANNABIS XPRESS. So I've had this business since about September 2020. So, time flies when I think about how long ago I started it. But it's been going great. So our focus of this business is looking at small to medium-sized towns with little to no competition. So I live in Toronto, but if you're in any of the big cities, most of them are pretty saturated with cannabis retail stores. And we're not as hugely well capitalized as some of the other public cannabis retailers. So the strategy was to pick places that most of them wouldn't go to. So we started opening up stores. Some of them are in larger cities in the GTA, but for the most part, at least probably 60-70% of our stores were the only store in town. So we've selected places where the population is large enough to sustain, to make the store profitable. Plus, some of the places we've picked also have, a fair amount of tourism, where people go there during the summer, the winter for different sports and activities. And then the locations that we pick are pretty small in size. So we're pretty unique because we have some of the smallest cannabis stores in the country by square feet. For example, like our store in Brampton has about 60 square feet of retail space.
And so Brampton would probably be the biggest city, I bet you're in, right?
Brampton's the biggest out of all the places we have stores, but we, smallest, really small footprint, and having a smaller size location, makes it a lot easier for a bunch of different things. For example, building out the store and actually getting it ready. The cost of, getting a store ready when it's much smaller, that really cuts the cost in half. So that significantly impacts our, speed at which we can open. So when we don't have to do that much work in the store, we can open up a lot quicker. And then also having a small store, we end up having only one person working at a time. So our labor cost is significantly lower than most other stores. Combined with utility costs, and I know, not just retail, but, housing, and, I'm sure you experience this as well. The cost of utilities have gone up significantly over the last couple of years. So just, heating, cooling, space is a lot less. So operationally picking small locations ends up being a lot cheaper. And then obviously picking, small towns, the rent is a lot lower.
It's interesting as I listen to all the, it's a very interesting strategy because, you kind of started off by saying, well, we weren't as well capitalized, but I'm not sure you'd make different decisions. I mean, you found yourself a niche and you're growing, and everything you're saying is right for the times, right? It's, you're cost effective. You can get small real estate. You're out of the big, you're not competing with 10 other retailers on the same street. It's almost like if you had to construct it this way, you still would, right? And does that make sense? Like if
if suddenly I waved a magic wand and would have given you a lot more money, would you have done it differently? Because it seems to work for you.
Yeah, I think I probably would have done it. I probably would have done it the same. I think it was a good amount of money that we had when we started the business. Like I've opened up all these stores for less than $1 million, and each store, the business is profitable. So I just keep opening up stores off of cash flow.
Well, there's a lot of competitors, former competitors who had more money, had a different model, and were not successful with it, right? So I just want to call that out. I mean, congratulations. Yeah.
I remember Fire and Flower. They opened up they built a store downtown Toronto in Yorkville, and it was too close to a school. And that store ended up the rent was like almost $100,000 a year. And they probably spent more on that store building it and paying rent and then closing it down more than what I spent on all my stores. So
Fire and Flower. Don't say that. Yeah, that's it. That was literally a flame out, eh? Unfortunately.
Yeah, obviously they went into bankruptcy and the profitable stores were, chopped up. But I think, going back in time, like if I did have 10x the amount of money to start the business, would I have done something differently? Probably not. I think I might have tried to open up one store closer to me. Just to see a place in North York where I live. But I think, having, not too much money at the time was really helpful to us just because I had to watch every dollar and where it goes. Right. So that's been helpful. Plus, having a small store, we have a limited product assortment. So we keep our SKU count around 200, while I've seen some stores that are, upwards of 1,000. And, having a lower SKU count means, less inventory cost, less, product getting old, going stale, where you have to discount it. So that's been helpful as well. So, generally having, the express quick, business model in these small towns has been good for us. So we opened up the first 14 in Ontario. And then after that, we started to expand over to New Brunswick.
You gave us a little bit of a hint of and we've been talking about this expansion. So the difference between when we first talked and today, well, there's a bunch of things that have changed. I mean, of course, the market is, finding its own way, and for good or ill. But this New Brunswick expansion is super interesting. So you've opened up a store. You've got 3 stores, one in St. Andrews. So talk about give the listeners who may not be as familiar with the province to province regulatory issues. What is it like in New Brunswick? Because I think there's Cannabis New Brunswick as well. Talk first of all about what the retail environment is like the regulatory environment for a minute, and then why did you pick New Brunswick?
So province to province in Canada, and if you look at the US, it's pretty similar, where each state has generally different rules. Right now in Canada, if you look at it, there's, public, where it's, open market. Anyone can open up a store. You just have to make sure you pass all the, the regulations, for example.
Ontario, a good example.
Yeah, in Ontario, BC, Alberta, you just need to make sure, the store is not too close to a school, and you get local approvals if required. So there's, open market where anyone can open up a store as long as you meet those approvals. Then there's some provinces where it's government-only stores, for example, Quebec. So Quebec is the only one where it's Quebec and PEI, where they're government only. And then there's hybrid provinces, which include British Columbia. They have their own stores plus private stores. And then New Brunswick is the other one where it's a mix of both. So Ontario is probably the easiest to open up a store in terms of, picking a location and passing the regulatory approvals. Obviously, the easier it is to open up a store in a certain province, then competition is going to be pretty fierce because everyone can do it.
Good news, bad news, right? Good news, bad news.
Yeah, pros and cons of each model. And then New Brunswick is unique because initially, so it's all government stores. They have about 25 government stores now. And they were actually going to sell their business several years ago, and then it started to turn a profit, and they decided to hold on to it. So it's a government crown corporation. And then they realized that there are a lot of small communities in New Brunswick where, cannabis, they're still buying cannabis illegally. People are requesting that they have a store, but it didn't really make sense for Cannabis New Brunswick to open up a large store there. So they're extremely innovative over there. And what they did was they introduced 10 RFQs, request for qualification, which is like a government package that you apply to. So it's a very in-depth application where you write information about your team, your location selection, your strategy,
experience,
etc. Experience, and then it all gets scored. So we applied for all 10. I saw it online. where, my initial plan was to only stay in Ontario just because I do so many things myself that for me to expand to another province, I would have to duplicate myself.
Yeah, it's not like it's next door, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then when I saw that, once you win one of these licenses, you're going to be the only store in town pretty much forever. That, piqued my interest. And I was like, I can apply for these. And, the risk is a lot lower when you get the license and you're going to be the only one operating it versus, other provinces where you can open up and then, a week later, someone can open up beside you.
Yeah. How do you, just before I lose my train of thought on this, how do you handle that? So obviously you can get in a plane and go there. I guess it meant you had to really find great partners or employees in New Brunswick that you could really count on, because you're not a drive away, you're a flight away, but you're a flight plus a drive, right? If you're in small towns, you're not exactly going to pop in easily, right?
Yeah, exactly. I got very lucky in that sense because my business partner, who's one of our shareholders, his best friend actually, who lived in Toronto, moved back to New Brunswick, and he was looking for a new opportunity. So someone who had retail experience, extremely hardworking, smart, and was really interested in cannabis. So the main thing, especially when you're expanding, and a lot of retailers, and not just retail, but any business, when you're looking at expanding to another market, if you don't have people on the ground that you can really truly trust to actually make the right decisions, then usually the expansion fails, because you can't just keep flying there, showing up, and then going back home. You really need trusted boots on the ground. So that was a very important, one of the most important reasons for our success in New Brunswick, was having that individual. His name is Nathan, working over there. So
shout out to Nathan.
Nathan's done great.
Fantastic. Now a quick question: there was 10 originally. Is there going to be another 10? Is it being done in tranches, or is it 10 and that's it? What are they talking about? What's your perspective?
So what happened was I applied for all 10 licenses. I actually was scored number 1 for every single license, but there was a percentage cap on the ownership. So it's not uncommon for this to happen. One company or individual could only own 30% of the total. So I had to pick three of the 10. So I picked the 3. I flew out there, drove around to each town, and I picked the 3 based on highest population, close in proximity to each other, and also had a fair amount of tourism business plus future growth. So I picked my 3, and then
just a quick question: how did you figure out if it was a good market for your product? I guess do you make the general assumption that every market there's cannabis consumption happening at a relatively similar level, or how did you assess that part?
Yeah, I think it was helpful because Cannabis New Brunswick, so they're a Crown corporation, they publish all their financial information. So looking at New Brunswick, it's small population, less than 1 million people for the whole province, and it made it a lot easier being able to see how much each store from Cannabis New Brunswick was making. They're doing over $100 million annually. So if you look at over $100 million annually for about 750,000 people. The per capita spend is significantly higher than what it is in Ontario. So people in New Brunswick do have a lot more disposable income to spend out there, just because, housing and, other things are a lot cheaper. So that was a good basis point, just being able to see that, there's a market over there because of how much, revenue I can see that the government stores are making. While, if you are opening up in a new place and there's no information to base it off of, then it's a little bit more tricky because, you can't, you're still making forecasts, but, generally I do think that, looking at, I do research and see what percent of Canadians actually consume cannabis. So you can, safely assume that if there's 1,000 people, 30%, 40%, whatever, using cannabis, at least, on a fairly decent basis. So I based it off that, plus looking at, the numbers that Cannabis New Brunswick were doing. But for the most part, people do consume cannabis, and, depending on the market, if it was a different country, the consumption levels might be different. But in Canada, you can assume that, if there's a couple thousand people in a town, it should be, sustainable to open up a store there.
And I guess the other variable is their willingness as a population, if I can put it that way, to buy from the legal market versus the illicit market, right? That transference. What does that look like in now you're operating in 2 provinces. What's your estimate in Ontario, and what's your estimate of the illicit market or the blend in New Brunswick?
Yeah, it's been changing. I think even since legalization, that's been changing. Like that's one of the key metrics that, Government of Canada uses to evaluate the success of legalization is, diverting illicit sales into legal sales.
Mm-hmm.
New Brunswick, they do their own forecasts. I think they're still about 60% legal versus illegal. So there's still a lot of opportunity in New Brunswick for legal stores to grow and sell product. And then in Ontario, I think it's the same thing, closer, I think it's a little bit higher in Ontario just because there's more access than New Brunswick and some of these smaller towns. So Ontario is probably around 60%, and then New Brunswick's still about 50-50 right now.
Interesting. And of course, in Ontario, we just opened up Mississauga, where I am. So, that's a big city not to have any legal cannabis for so long. It does look, as I look around in Mississauga here, I see a lot of indies opening up. So would you say on the whole, the cannabis market is, coast to coast, Ontario, New Brunswick is there's a lot of independent retailers versus big chains. That seems to be the more successful model. Why do you think that is?
There's definitely a lot more independent stores than big chain stores, and that's for a couple of reasons. Like some of the provinces set caps on ownership or how many stores can be there, but I think there was just that green rush at the beginning when everyone knows people smoke weed, so I think they just thought, okay, I'm successful in my own practice, whatever business it is, I'm going to start another business on the side to sell cannabis. So
how hard can it be, right, Chris? Yeah, exactly. How hard can it be, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially in Ontario. So I think there are some successful independent retail stores, but it does make, the costs of, service providers and, everything else comes down the more stores you have. So you can be more profitable if you have more stores, if you have the right strategy. But there are, I think most, probably 75% of cannabis retail stores right now are independent stores versus the big chain stores.
Let's talk more about the stores in New Brunswick. As you say, there's very small footprint stores, and talk about one of the locations is in like a heritage house, and talk about how that came to pass.
Yeah, so the three locations in New Brunswick that we have. So we opened up the first private retail store in the province, which was exciting, and then we opened up the 8th and the 9th store. So I mentioned before there were 10 total stores. One of them, actually, we were the only one that applied. So that license just disappeared because there was no runner-up for it. So there's 9 total private stores in the province right now. The process to open it was similar to Ontario in terms of like the regulatory security requirements, making sure it's not too close to a school. You have security cameras, locks on doors, an area of the store for cannabis storage. So all of that was pretty simple for me to do just because I've, done it so many times. The more challenging part of it was getting local, approvals to actually open up the store. Most of these small towns actually don't have bylaws for cannabis retail built into their bylaws. So I had to go through special planning advisory committees to get approvals for, signage and, just getting business licenses. So that was more of a challenge, which I haven't experienced before in Ontario. But we ended up opening the 3 stores, and, they're highly, highly successful. So these 3 stores are some of our best out of the whole package of 17 total.
Fantastic. And now was the winning formula for your convincing the folks in these small towns that you say, listen, I know how to run this. I'm a legit retailer, and we're going to take money away from illicit and organized crime. Was that the key selling feature? The other one I think is the way you did the signage, and maybe we'll put a couple of pictures on the stores. It's both makes it so that you could find the store, but it's also very subtle, right? So I think that was well thought out. Are those the kind of things that help sell those communities on it?
Yeah, I actually had to go in front of all these communities and speak to them during pretty big committee meetings because pretty much the whole town came out. And there was, most of the concerns that they had were pretty similar to what they have in Ontario.
Sure.
Where, people are, afraid that, someone's going to purchase cannabis products, consume them on site, and then, get in their car and, drive intoxicated and, just, drive into someone or whatever else. So that, that's always a concern that comes up. Plus, just having a store that just attracts, I guess the wrong people. So most of these concerns that they had, obviously end up never happening, or very like low percentage of these things happening. But I think it was also helpful that Cannabis New Brunswick has stores pretty close to, they're in all the major cities in New Brunswick. So at least a lot of these people could see that, there is a successful business with Cannabis New Brunswick, and none of these things happened where, they have their stores. So it made it a little bit easier how Cannabis New Brunswick, successfully runs their stores, which gave them a little bit more comfort. Plus having, this many stores that we own, my experience going out there was also pretty helpful. But their concerns were all valid, but obviously it's, a lot of them are misconceptions when people think of cannabis. Like most of the customers we have are, people like you and me, where we walk into the store, we buy a product, and then we go home right after.
Just like a bottle of wine or whatever, right? I mean, it's interesting timing, right? As we all think about it here in Ontario, the availability of beer and alcohol in convenience stores, because the same things are coming back up, right? When they have
it's expanding, right? Because it doesn't make sense to only sell products in gigantic big box stores. So the Ford government allowing convenience to start selling alcohol as well. It's the same thing that Cannabis New Brunswick is doing, where they're just increasing the amount of distribution points.
I want to get one last thing about your stores in New Brunswick. How are you integrating in the community? How's it going? Like, how do you market the store? Are you sponsoring stuff? Like, what's your toolkit so that the other retailers listening can kind of, hey, how do you interact, and what they can learn from you, how you interact in these small communities?
Yeah, just so everyone knows, there's a lot of restrictions, federally, as well as, provincially on cannabis marketing and advertising. So I can't just, put up billboards and banners in towns and things like that. So we are very restricted on what we can do. But typically when we open up a store, Ontario, New Brunswick, we get the town mayor to come out, all the city council comes out. So we do like a grand opening celebration where all of them come out. Usually a lot of the people in these towns read the local newspaper. So we are allowed to get stories written, like interviews of us in the local newspapers. So most of the people in town read the newspaper, which is helpful. So opening up that way. And then obviously it's important for us to have enough signage in the town, having a big sign, like you mentioned earlier about our signage, just keeping it simple where, it's very specific on what we do, Cannabis XPRESS, which is our name. Yeah. So people can see the sign, and we don't, we try to keep the colors pretty neutral where we don't, just stand out too much. Mm-hmm. But the signage, obviously word of mouth, and then all of the people we hire live locally. So it is very important, and that's one thing that helped the communities accept us, where, I told them, like, look, we're hiring people that are local. This is going to bring in additional revenue.
We're giving your neighbors a job. We're giving all the neighbors a good job.
Yeah, exactly. Jobs for the local people, plus obviously reducing the amount of illegal sales in the town as well.
Last question on New Brunswick. There's been some talk about on-site consumption. I don't know if the lounges or whatever in New Brunswick. How's that going? And do you see yourself playing any part of that?
So that conversation is between Cannabis New Brunswick and I guess the provincially and federally as well, just because some of the federal regulations in Canada touch on that. And then obviously there's, you can't smoke indoors and things like that. But they are looking at consumption. I think Cannabis New Brunswick is probably one of the most innovative, regulators in the whole country in terms of, what they're trying to do to push forward with, different types of, like the stores, the private stores, the public stores, and then introducing, looking at consumption. So I do think that there is a market for that. I'm definitely interested. Like some of the locations we have, there is extra space where we would be able to have some sort of, consumption area. So I am excited about that. I do think it'll probably take a little bit, more time.
A couple of years away, do you think?
It could be a year, it could be 2 years, but it will be interesting to see, how that ends up looking. And I do travel frequently to the US, and I, see consumption spaces in California and in Las Vegas, which, has a bunch of consumption spaces now. So it would be, really great to be able to introduce that as well. So we are looking into that. And, once Cannabis New Brunswick, figures out what they can do, then we're definitely interested in following along and, trying to do that as well ourselves.
Well, this has all been great. What's next for you? You've done a great job growing the business. What's next? What's down the road for the next year or so?
So our stores right now in New Brunswick, they are some of our most profitable stores. And that's for a few reasons. Like the margins on our products are higher. The general cost of operating the stores is lower. Plus, we are the only store in town, so being the largest private retailer in New Brunswick is helpful. And right now I'm looking at continuing our success and expanding in New Brunswick. So there's currently 9 stores there, and we're looking at acquiring several of the other stores in New Brunswick. So that probably won't happen till, closer to the end of this year, beginning of next year. So right now there is a limit on licenses. So the government hasn't issued more licenses in New Brunswick, but we're looking at, looking into buying some of the current retailers, and then also if Cannabis New Brunswick issues more licenses, we're going to be expanding that way, through application, keeping in mind we still have to, win the licenses. But how
does that not bump up against the percentage limit? How does that work?
So it's ownership. So basically, the 30% ownership limit was only on the first round of applications. So they haven't issued a second round of applications, but they may not put that as a requirement in there. So anyone could be applying for them, and I could obviously get over the 30% cap. I think when they initially set it up, they just wanted to make sure that it was fairly spread out. And, I think, we've shown our success as being a great operator over there. So I think they are, they're innovative, they're understanding, and they would allow us to continue, expanding and, get over that 30% cap. So that is an ongoing conversation with them. But right now we're looking at, buying some of the other stores out there just to, build on what we have in New Brunswick. Like Ontario is still interesting to me, but it is still very, very saturated. And New Brunswick is, we're doing great out there, so we might as well continue on expanding.
Yeah, I don't talk to a lot of retailers with that kind of optimistic note. So congratulations, and when you got a winner, keep going. Well, listen, if people want to get in touch with you, are you a LinkedIn person, or get in touch and learn more about the business? How do they do that?
LinkedIn, email, anything. I'm always available. Like I get a lot of people reach out to me, not just in cannabis, but, any type of business. I'm always interested in connecting with people to talk business generally, or, to help them out with whatever I can. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, I'm there, or, send over an email. Hopefully, I think when you post this, you should put the contact info. So that'd be great if, people have it, but I'm always available to talk to anyone about, business, cannabis, anything.
Fantastic. Well, there's lots to learn. You got great experience, and congrats on your success so far, and wishing you continued success. So, listen, thanks for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast again. Chris, you're a busy fella, but thanks for making time for chit and chat with us and share your experiences. And like I said, I wish you continued success.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm, excited to end up, I'll be on the show again at some point in the future, and it'll be interesting just to see how many stores we have and how big we get. So thanks again.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Blanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.